Welcome to Meadowlarkers 65. Amin Elhassan is here. Kate Fagan is here. I am Howard Bryant. It is the end of the month. No Sleep January, otherwise known as the Australian Open, is over. We are going to talk soccer today. We're going to talk some football. We're talking about a new documentary that is out right now called Super League, The War for Football, directed by Jeff Zimbalist. And I know we have a lot to say about it. Before we get started, our honorary captains for today, 65, we are slogging through the offensive lineman stage of the numbers. And so I can only throw two things out. One, I can throw out Damian Woody, offensive lineman for the New England Patriots and ESPN colleague, number 65, also New York Jets, Detroit Lions. But I'm also going to throw a pitcher out there, New York Yankees, Phil Hughes, also number 65. Not a whole lot here. I have very little to add. The only other 65 that really jumps out to me is that the 1965, the Boston Celtics won their 7th straight NBA title, soon to be 8 straight in 1966. We can do that next week. Super League, it is a 4-part series. We will go around the room. I think, Kate Fagan, you told me you are 2 parts in.
Yeah, I'm midway through the 3rd episode.
Amin?
I completed it.
You completed it. I have also completed it. It
right.
is the story. See, Kate, you got to go sit in the back now, right?
That's right.
I think when we do this,
spoiler alert, it doesn't end up happening.
Right, exactly. So Super League is the story of the very ambitious and yet botched attempt to create a super Champions League above the Champions League in European soccer, where the cream of the crop essentially separates itself from the rest of the pyramid tiers of professional football in Europe, and also separating itself from its own history. And this was a battle of greed, so they said. This was a battle for the future, of reimagining what football is going to look like, what professional sports is going to look like in an age of massive competition, huge salaries. How do you pay for all of this? On the one hand, you have a very populist battle taking place for the hearts and minds and the soul and the history of football, a people's revolution, if you will, even though the people side, which is UEFA, was a $12 billion industry. And then on the other hand, you had the Super League, which was essentially, it wasn't really stated that much in the document. We'll talk about that in a second, but it really was sort of an American-backed, real sort of, I guess, trying to create something similar to the Euro League in basketball, but also sort of a Power 5 deal in football to make it, to sort of separate the best from the rest. And with that, huge profits, incredibly, by my thoughts, really well done. Outstanding documentary by Jeff Zimbalist. Also, in the way that some of these documentaries, we also did this a few months ago with FIFA Uncovered, so it's been really fascinating for us to jump in on stories where we have a very specific American outlook when it comes to sports. We believe we're the center of the world, but these documentaries do not center on the United States. And it's really interesting sort of watching these docs from the standpoint of we're not the center of the world. Football is dwarfs the Super Bowl in terms of revenues and everything else. It's a monster. So let's jump in on this. The first episode really does sort of set up the combatants, which is really the Super League, which is the big 6 teams in England, Man United, Man City, Chelsea, Liverpool, etc., and then also the other big dogs out there, which is Barcelona, Juventus, and Real Madrid. And so trying to break away a breakaway republic, and their desires to position this number 1 as the future of football, to be the rising tide will raise all boats. And on the other hand, you have Alexander Shefrin, who is the president of UEFA, who's essentially saying what you're really going to do is you're destroying the actual century-old fabric of European football. Who wants to go first? I mean, you finished it, so we'll go with you. What were your thoughts, one overall, on the doc, on the story, and then let's sort of focus in on episode 1.
It was just a small production note. I cannot stand documentaries that have reenactments. I'm not talking about the content. It was very interesting and informative, everything, but I can't stand. It was like, and then Alexander Chevron was on. So I picked up a call. I called Agnelli, and then they show him on the phone outside on a balcony.
You mean that footage wasn't real?
Yeah, like the worst.
Like when he's driving to Switzerland, that whole 8-hour drive was not actual document.
They didn't actually have cameras there.
My favorite part was when he's like, he walked into a room and had a conversation with Infantino right before they went out to do this for this conference. And of course, Infantino did not agree to be in the documentary. So they had the silhouette of a bald man standing against the window. And I just don't do it. You don't have to do that. You can just not have that part of it there. But
spoiler alert there, Kate, that's episode 4. You haven't gotten to Infantino yet.
All right, I'll be there soon.
But I was fascinated on so many different levels by this thing. And I think the first thing I was fascinated about was, despite who introduced this idea in Europe, it is a very American concept. A closed league. The franchises are here. It's designed to mitigate loss as much as possible. And that to us is like, yeah, that's sports in this country. And for them, it's such a foreign concept. And the idea that that the haves would kind of shove out the have-nots was so contrary to their belief of what this thing is, right? They don't think of it as a business at all. At least they pretend to not think of it as a business. Whereas
fans, not customers.
Right. Whereas in this country, we're very accustomed to the point where fans will side with the owners of their teams over the people who play for them. That's how in the bag we are for business in this country. That, oh yeah, it's of course it's these players that don't want to do the right thing. Whereas over there, the overwhelming belief is like, no, this is a public good. I don't care who's cutting a check to make all of this happen. The team belongs to us, and how dare you make these decisions? So that was the very first thing that I found very fascinating. And then my fascination has moved on to a completely different thing, which is it's really interesting how we pick the villains in these stories, right?
Well, they shift in this. Kate, thoughts?
Yeah. Well, Amin's first point about hating reenactments, I don't hate them as much as Amin does. I mean, sometimes they're ham-handed. So I don't like them if they're done poorly. In this case, I think I was so enamored and invested in the access that the doc got with the key people who are a part of this Super League fiasco that they could could get Sefrin to reenact it was just so mesmerizing to me.
That's what I thought about too.
You got to admit, that piece is kind of awesome.
Willing to pull over on the gas station and reenact when he stopped for gas and made a phone call. Like, okay,
looking out at the Swiss Alps, by the way, I want to go to that gas station.
Yes,
that's the prettiest gas station in the world.
It's the kind of thing where once he's willing to do it, I'm like, you got to air it because this dude was willing to do that. So just from a doc perspective, not just, because when we talked about FIFA Uncovered a couple months ago, we were surprised by the people who sat for the documentary. In this case, not only do they have people sitting for it, they have intimate access that allows it to play more like a thriller. Like
they have people acting. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Even being partway through the third episode, I don't really think this is a sports doc. It's almost like a business thriller
Mm-hmm.
more than it is a sports doc.
It's what's the show on HBO? Why am I drawing a blank on this? Succession. That's to the point where the music at some point is definitely derivative of the Succession piano.
Yeah. And from the villain perspective, in the beginning, I'm like clearly aligned with Agnelli and the other Super League owners being the villains. But I thought that the doc and the director did a really good job of at least seeming agnostic on this question of who is right and who is wrong in this Super League question, because there is a case to be made, because we deal with it. We're dealing with it currently here, as you both mentioned, with NCAA football. There's a question like where I am not interested when Chelsea plays bottom feeding team in the Premier League. I am less interested in that. I have been fed enough Marvel, DC superhero blockbusters to become addicted to superheroes and stars, even though that isn't necessarily the sports world that I grew up in. So I do understand the concern where like if it is about money, they are not maximizing dollars. There's a lot of places for us to go, but the question that is most on my mind 2+ episodes in, and maybe you both can help me out here, is I'm used to listening to American owners cry poor in labor negotiations, and I don't believe them. And in this doc, I can't quite wrap my mind around, let's say Arsenal, for example, and Stan Kroenke, when he buys that club, it's probably worth a third of what its value is now. Like I went back to 2005 valuations of Premier League clubs, or actually all of European clubs. Arsenal is now worth $2+ billion, and then it was worth something like 600 to 700 million. So I'm a little sort of turned around on the crying for poor question that is supposedly driving the creation of the Super League. Like I know that some of them are bleeding money yearly on salaries, but it's like the only equation I have in my head is, okay, if my house's value is X and I take out a loan to remodel something, yes, I have $100,000 in debt, but the value of my property is skyrocketing. So like, are we actually believing that these Super League teams are in jeopardy if they don't come up with a fix?
Well, the argument in the documentary is the relegation system is threatening the entire business model because the salaries are going up so much.
Right.
That the problem here is you are paying these massive unregulated transfer fees. There's no salary cap over there. And the money that you get by being in the Premier League or the Champions League, or that is the money that allows you to pay for these things. And if you have a bad season and you get relegated back down, then you're not going to have the money to keep up with the rising cost of transferring players. And so the Super League argument was, well, if we have these blue chip teams have a fixed place in this Super League, then they're going to continue to be able to maximize and pay and keep up with the cost of the game without having to worry about losing a boatload by going down, which runs completely counter to the entire history of relegation, promotion, aspiration. If you're one of the lower teams, they talked about Leicester City, having its remarkable, crazy championship. It's NC State Cinderella run type of thing. The thing that hit me first about the first episode, and I think that it did a fantastic job. And before I continue with that, I'm going to stop and say, if you don't like reenactments, I mean, you clearly do not watch A&E or the History Channel ever.
I can't.
That's right.
I can't.
You just clearly didn't watch the
honestly,
John Wilkes Booth assassination of Lincoln because that was a reenactment, man.
Rather have someone sit in a chair and just tell me what's happening.
But they couldn't get John Wilkes Booth to sit in the chair. He's been dead 150 years.
I mean, what about
the Professor
Drunk History?
Drunk History, I love.
What about animation?
You like those reenactments?
because it's poking fun at the ridiculousness of the reenactment.
That's
Okay.
It just takes me out of it. It takes me out of it when I see the guy on the phone. Yeah, the Infantino one was the one where I was like, I want to turn this off now, because it just ruined what was a very tense moment in the story with this Alfred Hitchcock silhouette of Infantino. I'm like, stop it. It's not him.
Yeah. So the first episode sets up the first Game of Thrones battle, which is between Sheffrin and Andrea Agnelli, the head of Juventus. He's the scion of the entire country.
Yeah.
It seems like this.
It sounds like a Fiat, Ferrari.
Fiat. Do they own everything in Italy?
They own everything, and they're the longest tenured. He's very proud of this. The longest tenured sports ownership group in the history of sports in the world.
In the history of the world. No, well, how could it be? They've owned it for 100 years. I mean,
100 years.
Who could,
History of sports, really.
Exactly. Well, who would be? That's a great question. Who would be second to that?
Second?
Because the Wrigleys don't own the
Maras?
Cubs anymore, right?
Yeah, I was about to say the Rooney family.
The Rooney is since the 20s. Yeah, they're pretty close, and the Maras as well. They have owned the Giants for pretty much the entire history of the NFL. And so you have that battle, and that battle is not just a battle of ideology. It's also a battle of morality, because one feels they are betrayed by the other, but it's also a battle of friendship, because Sheffrin is the godfather of Agnelli's child, and so the personal the personal tension.
And that reenactment where they're both standing around the crib,
the Godfather moment,
taking turns holding the baby. That was a great reenactment.
I just wanted someone to say, do you renounce Satan?
It was, that part. I did not know that part. Obviously.
That part's a great part.
It's a great part. Like, I'm talking about the story, not the reenactment.
You didn't like him holding the baby looking out the window?
It was dumb.
Shadowy.
Was it Sophia Coppola?
Oh, so
you get that reference, Kate?
I get it. That's the daughter of Francis Ford Coppola. So that's who the baby would have been.
That's who the baby was in The Godfather.
Right. Okay.
Godfather.
Did she actually play the baby in that?
Yeah, she's the baby.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Remember, I haven't seen the third or the second.
Well, you only need the first one for that one.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, Amin.
So, that there was this strong of an alliance between the two.
Well, they're family now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to the point where Agnelli says, "Oh, if something happens to me, I have no doubt he's going to take care of my daughter." I'm like, is that what godparents do? I thought it was just like a ceremonial thing.
No, you got to take care of the kid.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
He got a whole, he's a billionaire.
Also,
I need this other guy.
He said that after all this shit went down, right?
Yeah.
So he's sitting for this interview and he's still talking about the trust.
That's what the cool thing about this documentary is, but also I think a little easier than the FIFA doc is that everyone in this documentary thinks they did the right thing, and they've got nothing to be ashamed about. Mm-hmm. And from a certain point of view, I agree. Like, I could see all the perspectives. The FIFA doc, some of these people were outright crooks. So to have the balls to sit down for this thing, I'm like, damn, like
exactly. The Chuck Blaze, that's just brazen.
You gotta. I mean, my man, Sepp Blatter.
Totally brazen.
Totally brazen in a way that these guys, I don't think they were brazen. I think they legitimately think to this day I did nothing wrong. I have a clear conscience.
Yeah. The thing about go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, the moments where the billionaires feel truly wronged by the trillionaires, like they truly feel like they've been trampled on. Like the Real Madrids feel trampled on by Middle Eastern money.
Well,
right?
how wouldn't you feel trampled on when the entire country of Qatar owns a soccer team? You can't compete with that.
Real Madrid steps on to the stage and Perez decides to just buy every star and trample every other team. And then he has it done to him, and he's like, "Wait, this isn't cool. I don't like
How dare
this."
you do to me what I just did to you?
Oh my God, the level of myopia happening here, where these people, where the same guy who's taking credit for Galacticos, signing every single big play. Oh man, we turned around the club and knew our revenues were this and it went to this and it was the greatest thing. And I'm so smart. I'm like, well, that's not fair. They're doing it bigger than I am. And it reminded me of a line from the film Pirates of Silicon Valley, which was kind of a dramatic retelling of the starts of Microsoft and Apple and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and this rivalry that they had going back in the 80s. And there's a very tense scene where Steve Jobs and Bill Gates are having this argument because Steve Jobs feels like Bill Gates stole something.
Stole the IP
from Apple's. Yeah. And Bill Gates replies, "Get real, would you? You and I are both like guys who had this rich neighbor, Xerox, who, by the way, created graphic user interface, who left the door open all the time. And you go sneaking in to steal a TV set. Only when you get there, you realize I got there first. I got the loot, Steve. And you're yelling, that's not fair. I wanted to try and steal it first. You're too late." And the line rang in my head. I was like, that's what that is, right? They're mad that these guys got to do the competitionally unfair move better than we were doing it. And now it's a problem. And that was the part where I said, it's interesting to me that they were kind of almost everybody, regardless of what side you're on, trying to make it seem like, these so-and-so's from somewhere else, whether Middle East.
There's something else to consider here. I mean, and to me, the very first thing in watching the first episode, I thought that this was a perfect show for a perfect documentary for this show. And the reason why I thought it was perfect was because these are the themes that this show, that the Meadowlarkers have been talking about for 65 episodes now, which is empire versus community. And that is really what the first episode really is all about. Even though the community, UEFA, is a $12 billion industry in of itself, it is still positioning itself as we are the fiber, we are the connective tissue to the history and the roots of this, that yes, we are super rich, but we don't have to be super richer. It doesn't have to be infinite, which is an interesting way to say that they were also protecting their flank.
Of course.
And so there was that. And there was also this idea that that what the Super League was doing is different than what the Champions League did 30 years earlier. And that there is a limit to this, and that you can, I think what Jeff Zimbalist did a terrific job of doing was setting up those two in opposition. Otherwise, it's just rich people fighting with rich people. And people would turn off to that. But the way that it was set up to, the way to my ears when I watched the first episode, it was, yes, there are very clear lines here between, are we maintaining history or are we going for all the dollars? And I think the thing that hit me most about that first episode was the idea that somehow sports is going to be insulated from the empire that we are selling across the globe in every single element of our lives. We reject community in general. We reject it all across the board. And so why wouldn't it infect the things you hold dear? It fascinated me that you have all these fans yelling and yelling and yelling and screaming, and yet these people are probably, at least half of them, are voting to privatize in all their in other pieces of their lives. They're voting for policies that do exactly what the Super League is doing to their passion.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting juxtaposition, because the battle that is taking place in this documentary is the battle that's taking place in damn near every single other element of our lives.
Yeah, there's this there's the moment where I think it's in episode 2 where Paris Saint-Germain comes into the equation and the Qatari money, and they are, spending 200 million on Neymar, 180 million on Mbappe. And then there's that line where it's like, well, they are not actually trying to turn a profit on this. And it's so perfectly, to your point, Howard, it so perfectly maps onto what Amazon has done in the book industry. Like everybody in the book industry is like, Amazon's not trying to turn a profit on its book business. It is trying to drive every other bookseller out of business, so then it has a monopoly on the book industry, and it's willing to take losses for a very long time to do that. I know PSG is doing something different, and the Qatari money is also trying to like sports wash its image. But this is of course it is about European soccer, but it's really, we could talk about it. I'm sure you two could talk about it at length because you love comic book hero movies. We could talk about it applying to Hollywood. 100%. And we could talk about it applying to the book industry. I mentioned Colleen Hoover when you weren't here, Howard, and how like, you know, the authors who sell millions of copies are the ones who are essentially earning your literary fiction advance for $40,000. And it's that same model where it's like, okay, so Real Madrid is earning whatever distribution money for small little local club that wants to, you know, have its flag in the ground in football. So it's like this is happening in almost every industry. And dancing between, because I mean, I haven't finished it like you all do. Dancing between, is this an evolution? Like, do we by necessity need something, some next thing in football? I haven't answered that question for myself yet, you know, 2.5 episodes in. Like, some sort of evolution seems to need to happen.
Well, let's take a break here and let's go to baseball. Okay. So last month after the winter meetings, you're starting to look at these contracts. And John Henry's team, the Boston Red Sox, was getting demolished for having let Xander Bogaerts go, for having traded Mookie Betts earlier, that Trey Turner goes to the Philadelphia Phillies for $330 million, that the Padres, the effing Padres, have 3 guys making $300 million on that roster. They're the Padres. And if that's what, if you know, it's like we were saying the other day, I mean, about the Phoenix Suns went for $4 billion. The Suns, if the Suns go for $4 billion, what are the Lakers worth? What are the Celtics worth? What are the Knicks? Right. You know, and so when you're watching this documentary, well, at least when I was watching it, it was bringing me back to the American side of this, where it's like I don't, you know, and as much as I've always been a labor person, and I'm always, you know, that's just sort of my, you know, that's my rooting on this. At some point, you do have to go, how long can this last? And how long before, I mean, if you are trying to deal with a nation state owning a soccer team, how do you compete with that? And so from that standpoint, while I'm watching this documentary, I'm trying to do the math. And I think one of my favorite characters was the president of La Liga. This guy he was great.
Oh, Tebas.
Yeah,
he's great. Yeah.
He's fantastic. And he's, you know, at one scene, he's doing the math when he's talking about, well, we've been guaranteed, you know, everyone's been guaranteed $700 million each. He's like, it doesn't add up. But if there's one thing that we've learned being on this planet as long as we've been, all of us covering sports, is that there always seems to have been more than you thought there could be, right? It's like, there doesn't seem to be an end. Like, I remember, you know, when I'm doing the history, when I was working on my Hank Aaron book, Hank Aaron, you know, the late great Henry, he signed in 1972, he signed a 3-year, $600,000 contract and was the highest paid player in baseball history. And his position after the Curt Flood case was, well, we have to have a reserve clause because there's no way the money could be within 3 years. Guys were making $1 million. You know, they were signing $1 million contracts. Within 10 years, guys are signing $20 million contracts. And, you know, and so on the one hand, you're looking at this and you're going, yeah, I mean, how does it maintain? But on the other, you're thinking, well, the games have always gone on in some way. They've always found more money. And you know what? Maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea if the whole damn thing collapsed, that it had to start over in some way, right? I mean, maybe the populist argument does have value, that this does belong to the people and that this is a public asset, and this can't go on as long as it's gone on. The argument to the Super League, though, is it can go on, and this is the way to keep it going.
I think there's a lot of stuff that surrounding the amount of money being spent. I think they mentioned there is a strong correlation between money spent and success. And I think that's bears to mind. But when you look at that top tier of teams, the winning team is often not the one that spent all the money on all the players. PSG, for example, since being bought by QSI, they have never won the Champions League. They've appeared in one Champions League final and lost in the decade plus. Do they dominate the French league? Absolutely, because the French league is not a competitive league, not like the EPL, not like La Liga. But ultimately, these clubs are all operating on almost like a tier system already. But once you're in that tier, the idea that Real Madrid is poor because PSG spends a lot of money is ridiculous.
That's the question I was asking earlier. The question I'm asking earlier about, are these clubs actually in danger?
Well, they weren't crying poor on this, Kate. They're crying rich.
No.
They're crying poor. They're saying they're leaking money.
Yes, they okay. So to be fair, like Kate, what you were talking about earlier, yes, the value of the club is rising, but liquidity matters, right? Liquidity matters. And to use your example, I own my house and I bought my house, it was worth 100,000 and now it's worth 500,000. That's cool, but I got bills today that I can't just point to my house and say, so that matters. And some of these clubs are losing money, particularly the ones in the poorer leagues, right? Juventus is losing money because the Italian league is not bringing in the type of TV money. Yep. Yeah, that it used to, or that some of these other bigger competitions are. So there is a legitimacy to, hey, this is financially insolvent for us, but to either blame other entities for that because they're spending and we can't, or B, think that the only remedy is to spend wildly out of control. Right. Those are the things I reject. The other thing I also kind of rejected was the idea that these foreign entities are buying these clubs specifically for sports washing. Yes, sports washing happened.
Well, I think they pointed that to the Arab purchases and the Russian purchases, but not the American purchases.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely right. Which to me was like, well, hold on for a second. I have no doubt that Roman Abramovich, who does not own Chelsea anymore, he sold it, but likes football way more than Malcolm Glazer does. Like, there's a part of this, yes, it helps to kind of clean up the image or whatever. And there's also the part of it, like, these people are insanely huge fans of the sport, and they got the money to spend it. It's no different from Steve Ballmer saying, I love basketball, I'm going to buy a team in LA, even though I'm not from LA and I don't have any ties to the LA area. But we don't call that Microsoft washing, right? For whatever, dastardly deeds they did up there in Seattle.
We always believe we're the good guys on everything. I thought it was also really interesting in the doc where, to Kate's point, are you rich or poor based on who you're comparing yourself to? Right, that they are calling themselves poor because they are basing themselves against the the United Arab Emirates, right? I mean, you're
sovereign wealth fund.
Exactly. Come on. And so I remember one time back in 2004, 2005, somewhere in there, I got a call from Larry Lucchino, who was one of the owners of the Red Sox, and he was screaming at me, "I am so fucking sick of you saying that the Red Sox and the Yankees are even. Do you understand how much more revenue they bring in than we do? Do you understand, that they dwarf us in every single financial category?" And I said, well, yeah, but Larry, you dwarf the other 28 teams in every other financial category. I said, you won the World Series last year, and it wasn't the Yankees who had spent the most to win a championship. It was you. To that point in 2004, the Red Sox had the highest payroll of any championship team in history at that moment. Now, obviously, it's gone higher now. It was 20 years ago. But it's a clever ruse to call yourselves destitute when you're comparing yourself to the top of the top of the top.
Yeah. Yeah.
One other thing. Oh, go ahead, Kate.
Well, I don't know if you all read some of the stories coming out of Qatar during the World Cup. They did, the New York Times, I did a few pieces on the club level accesses and the stratosphere of VIP that changed in Qatar, which was before it'd be like VIP, right? If you were a VIP at a World Cup, it's like, you know, this service is coming to drive you to an entrance, and then you're going to have good seats and you're going to have open bar. But in Qatar, there was VVIP, which was, right, you get a limo directly, and it was top shelf liquor, and it was like whatever other amenities. I'm not even rich enough to understand. Services. Exactly. And there would be people there who were VVIP one game, and then the next game they'd look at their ticket and they would just like become crestfallen seeing that they were just VIP.
And then there's the VVVIP.
If you didn't even know VVIP existed, you'd be pretty happy with your black car to the entrance. And it feels like it's a very similar thing happening here, where it's like, okay, like, yeah, it depends which way you're looking, whether you're going to feel successful or inferior. And I mean, it happens in every industry, but it's just, you know, it becomes unsavory watching it happen here.
Yeah. Can we make it? Go ahead. I mean,
I was gonna say, it's fun to win like first division until you realize, oh, there's a Premier League that's above this.
Yeah.
It's above me.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's also switch gears very quickly and talk about the populist piece of this. Kate, you haven't finished it, so I think it's good for us to sort of stay in the space where you that the stuff that you've seen so far. And one of the things that I actually sort of thought about in watching this was this idea of the community-owned entity. Like, one of the things that always hits me when I am writing stories and I get all the responses back from the fans who have sided with management, well, it's a private team, they can do what they want, right? You hear that all the time. And I respond to people, no, they play in a public stadium that comes from your taxes, right? This is actually yours, believe it or not, that they may own it, but it's actually yours. You're paying for it. You're not just paying for it with tickets, but you're paying for it. You know, the money that goes to their stadium renovations could have gone to your school and computers, could have gone to fixing potholes. There is a community element to this. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about the doc was how well the documentary did focus on the true belief that Arsenal belongs to the people. Not because they feel so passionately about their team, but because that's actually the historical roots of that team. They started out all as local clubs. They belonged to the local municipality. And for Americans, we have a very difficult time with that, because if you're under the age of 75 or 80 now, when you're thinking about it, you've grown up with teams just leaving. You're grown up with the Seattle Supersonics leaving town, or the Boston Braves moving to Milwaukee and the Milwaukee Braves moving to Atlanta. You're used to Philadelphia going to, Kansas City, and Kansas City moving to Oakland, right, for the Athletics. So this piece of it is very sort of foreign to Americans. And I thought that it was, that it did a really good job of talking about the depth of how much they felt, and also the sort of activist power that they have based on that belief. I think most Americans would talk a big game and then say, oh, you can't fight City Hall, there's nothing we could do.
Oh yeah. I think we do have the belief that certain teams, I think we mirror a lot of what happened in the doc, at least through where I've watched, in many of the community beliefs about your allegiance to the team, right? You can't grow up in Philly or live in Philly and not feel like people in Philly believe that the Eagles are their team in the same way that some of these clubs do. But to your point, Howard, I don't think that they actually believe that if they banded together, they could make certain changes.
Can we stop the Dodgers from moving to Los Angeles?
Can I ask this question? As much as the passion of the fans in the streets and the fires and the signs and all that, really, is that what stopped the Super League from happening?
No, and Kate hasn't gotten to that point yet.
Well, it hasn't, right? I mean, it hasn't stopped. It's just delayed, as far as I can tell.
Well, no,
it's
I don't
not
think
stopped.
I'm saying, okay.
No, I don't even mean in the doc. I mean, I know how it played out. I'm just saying, is the Super League has been stopped? It hasn't been.
No, what I'm saying to you isn't that whether it's stopped permanently, stopped temporarily, whatever. I'm saying the fans didn't do that in the same way that Artie Moreno, the example that I heard David Sampson talk about in his pod that he does with Skipper, that Artie Moreno didn't take the Angels off the market because he wants to win a championship for the greater Los Angeles area. He took it off the market because he wasn't getting the money that he thought he was going to get.
Exactly.
And so they kind of, a lot of these teams shifted under what was political pressure. Now you could say indirectly the political pressure came from the fans and all that.
Kate hasn't gotten to the legislative bomb yet. She hasn't gotten to that point.
What a term.
I'll cover my ears.
But I guess
they're reenacted.
Reenacted legislative bomb.
What was the idea that, again, we're all lying to ourselves, aren't we, Howard? Like you're saying, oh, the Eagles really belong to the people of the city of Philadelphia, or that Arsenal belongs to the people of that section of London. But the reality is it doesn't.
The reality is that it doesn't. And that it's gone.
These decisions aren't being made with any of these people in mind. And the only time you bring them up, like when Man City and all these owners came out with their videos after they withdrew, said we made a mistake and we heard you guys. No, you didn't hear them. You heard threats from FIFA and UEFA, and spoiler alert again, Kate. That was the thing. They thought they had Infantino in the bag, and they didn't. And then they didn't.
Well, and that's the
reenactment.
The thing I really do like about this too is the documentary does an outstanding job of creating the political tensions between each of the entities. Because most times when you get into these political thrillers, if it's done poorly, like I can't keep up with who's who, you know what I mean? I don't feel strongly enough about any of them. I think what I really liked about Schifrin, even though he's overseeing a $12 billion industry, was in the first episode when they talked about his roots, that he comes from a socialist country. He comes from a place where, that even though they did not have all of the material things, they also did have a sense of community, which is one of the things that in the West we never ever talk about. I did an interview the other day with somebody who had defected to East Germany, to the GDR during
from East Germany, or you defected to East Germany?
To East Germany.
Wow.
Yes.
I didn't know it went in that direction.
Nobody does. I'm like, yeah, there are people who actually believe in socialism. And he said, yeah, we didn't have what West Germany had. They had all the cars and they had all the economy and they had everything. But we didn't have anybody sleeping on the street either. He said, all that homelessness and all the stuff that you see that have, we didn't have that. Everybody had a house. You didn't have a lot, but you had a place to live. You didn't see people sleeping in the park. And so, go ahead.
There's a moment, I think it's episode 1, where, and this is why I really like the Sephirin. I'm calling him a character, in this business thriller, is he makes a little jab at Agnelli where he's like, I don't think this guy has ever essentially gotten punched in the face.
Never had to fight. Yeah.
He never had to fight.
He never really had to fight for anything he wanted. So if I put up a fight here, who's really going to fight? Who knows how to fight? I like that moment. And like, it's very good storytelling that their main character, the UEFA chief, comes from this quote unquote working class background. And he is the one fighting supposedly for the populist outcome in this doc. Like all of that worked very well in this doc.
Yeah, it did. And I think that the other argument in that too, I mean, the other tension in there was he's actually also a fighter. He's like a black belt in martial arts or whatever. So he's like, in karate, I actually have been hit in the face.
And served also.
Served. And he's got he's a military guy. So, so I really thought that to your point, I mean, no, did all of this actually change? And there was a piece of it too that I sort of thought was very interesting in terms of, whenever I see rows and rows and rows and flanks of white people storming buildings. I always think about the privilege that comes with being able to storm buildings and not be shot for it.
Yep.
And I was thinking about how this idea of ownership, and it's not the same, obviously, as January 6th. I don't think about that way. But what I do think about in watching it is the belief that this belongs to me, that the ownership, like when people would make the argument, it's like, well, how come, when the protesters stormed to CVS, everybody went bananas, but nobody, but people seem to allow for you to jump through the windows of the US Capitol because of ownership. That this idea that this thing is I'm not trespassing because it's mine.
Right.
And you are trespassing because that CVS does not belong to you. You don't have the right to burn it down. It's not yours. And so to your point, Amin, yes, it does. There is a question here where you look and you go, okay, does all of this really translate to the reasons why the political machine shifted? And the answer is no. Is it more than cosmetic? Yes, because they did have to pay. What do we always talk about when it comes to protest, right? Governments and entities respond to people in the street. So it's not just window dressing. It's not just cosmetic. Right. But I think that the Boris Johnson stuff, Kate, when you get to it, clearly when they do talk about the economics, when they talk about the amount of dollars the Premier League stands to lose or the Champions League stands to lose by the Super League, I think that had a lot to do with it too.
I called that segment the sports washing of Boris Johnson.
No, exactly, and that's really what
the guy tells you. I don't even care about football, but whoa, this could get me.
And that's what he said. I don't watch football. I don't know anything about football, but I know this matters to the people. In other words, how do I win politically here? I'm in trouble right now. But is there some way I can turn this to my advantage? Which is something that we see in the United States all the time. One more thing as we start to wrap this up that we didn't talk about that I think that we should very quickly is the American influence in this. Let's not forget that the Super League, really, that the three of the vice chairman, Stan Kroenke, who, by the way, already yanked a team out of St. Louis and moved them to Los Angeles with the Rams. So he don't really care about what the people think. He's like, I've done this before. Let's not forget you got John Henry, owner of Liverpool, also Boston Red Sox, also Pittsburgh Penguins, and of course Joel Glazer, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And so what I found interesting about this doc is that the shadow monster for all of the things that are going on in between the infighting and the personal battles between Infantino and Sheffield and Galley and the rest of them, the shadow monster is the United States. And none of them are interviewed. No Glazer, no Kroenke, no John Henry.
Yeah, there's no upside there for them.
Exactly. And I found that piece of it fascinating, and also that the Super League is also bankrolled by an American bank, by JP Morgan, 3.5 billion, JP Morgan Chase. And so that piece of it also does make it really interesting in terms of access, also in terms of who your enemy really is and who's doing this. It made me think of college football, especially because this has got Power 5 written all over it, that let's just do a breakaway and do a Super League. That's what we're seeing in the college football playoff right now. And so the American fingerprints on a story that's not American was sort of fascinating to watch as the shadow monster. And then especially as it contrasted to FIFA Uncovered, where it looked like Loretta Lynch and James Comey and those guys were the shadow do-gooders, and then ended up essentially being toothless, having no real power. And also one other thing as we go into final thoughts here on this doc, I will always enjoy the European-centric sports documentary because they're all so well-dressed. It's like Bond villains. It's like a Bond villain convention, isn't it?
I wanted to wear a suit watching it. That's
same. Look at this going. I need to up my wardrobe here when I walk into a room, because all of these guys look like their suitcases are filled with like diamonds. They've got
thumb skinny tie suit is where it's at.
And thumb cuffs, right? It's like they've got like German bear bonds or something that are going to cross the border with. I'm not FIFA uncovered. Super League final thoughts, Kate Fagan.
No, I mean, just this is ostensibly about the Super League, but like we've talked about, it's really about a lot of entities you love, right? You can just project this onto movies and books and seeing
It's
sports
Empire.
like we talk about. And I guess also just check me in the box in favor of reenactments, Yeah.
How are you supposed to watch the Lifetime channel when the woman kills her husband in his sleep without a reenactment? What, do you just want to kill people?
This choppy filter where, like, it's never smooth, right? It's just like, and then he walked in, and it's always choppy.
And it's in slow motion, by the way.
Yep.
Yeah, usually.
But not a
slow motion reenactments.
It's a choppy one.
I mean, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I guess I could sum it up with white people really don't like it when white people do white people things to them.
It is so true. I mean, because once again, who are the owners? You can't do this to me. We can do this to other people, but you can't do this to us. And I that does also come through in a fascinating way, the way you look at it. And I was also thinking about our good friend Kate Fagan on this, because in 4 episodes, and I'm not talking about the talking heads, but the actual people you see in the room, I think I counted like 3 women in 4 episodes.
So far, well, other than the talking heads, there has been one woman dressed very nicely at the UEFA Congress, walking past the camera, not an actual character, more like just collateral.
NPCs.
Bystander.
That's what my kids call them. NPCs.
Yes.
That is true. And so it is a very male dominated, very insular, very powerful, which
is why it's so fucked up. I mean, come on.
They show it but it does, however, make you feel like, somewhere along the line, Bond is going to come zipping around the corner in a really fancy sports car. And we need the only thing that that Super League doesn't have is
through the Alps.
Exactly. We don't have a car chase. We have a car ride through the Alps.
We have very
but we
nice
don't have a car chase.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, that is it for us from Meadowlarkers 65. We will see you next week when we talk about something else, whatever that's going to be. But I absolutely do recommend Super League. It's on Apple TV Plus, and it's a really, really good one. We'll see you next week.